The Judith and Norman Alix Art Gallery was originally known as the Sarnia Public Library and Art Gallery from 1961 until 1991. Through amalgamation, they became part of the County of Lambton and became known as Gallery Lambton, at which time the gallery was relocated to the Bayside Center in 1994. Since then, the gallery worked towards building a purpose-built Category A facility to house their permanent collection and mount a full range of historical, contemporary, and new media exhibitions. Following a feasibility study, the Tom Building was deemed an ideal opportunity for redevelopment and the wheels were set in motion. Construction began, a fundraising drive was coordinated, and some 92 years after the gallery's first exhibition, the new facility opened to the public on the weekend of October 5th, 2012. The Judith and Norman Alix Art Gallery is a free public art gallery located in downtown Sarnia, Ontario. Rooted in community, the exhibitions and curatorial projects are based on the cultural dynamics of the regional community within the framework of the larger provincial and national arts community. With more than 200 members, over 1,300 works of Canadian art in the permanent collection, and with the support of a keen team of 80 volunteers, the gallery serves an immediate community of 128,000 people across Lambton County. So, after that introduction, I will now turn things over to Lisa Daniels to share her story about the Judith and Norman Alix Art Gallery's capital project. So, over to you, Lisa.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me, Alix? Nobody can hear me. Okay, well, thank you to ArtsBuild team for hosting this webinar and inviting me to be part of the presentation. It's a real pleasure to share our community's process and my perspective as someone who has managed through a community capital project to build a Category A regional public art gallery from start to finish. By sharing our story with you, I hope to offer a glimpse into how we navigated the divergent public and institutional interests and goals, and how we were able to bring the community, the funders, the politicians, the decision makers, and the naysayers along with us on the journey. Before I get into the meat of things, I'd like to give a bit of a context about our community and how it fits, how the gallery fits into it. Lambton County is a rural urban community in southwestern Ontario. I'll try not to duplicate what how Alix introduced us. We are a part of the Corporation of the County of Lambton, which is responsible for the provision of cultural services to the residents of the county. And included in the department is the Judith and Norman Alix Art Gallery, 26 libraries, and the museum. Since 1961, when the gallery opened on the second floor of the Sarnia Public Library, the collection has grown to over 1,300 works and includes a wide range of national, provincial, and regionally significant artists. The gallery offers historical and contemporary art exhibitions, educational services, tours, talks by artists, and community art programs and classes. Like many communities, Lambton County has a rich diversity of art and cultural activities, including a multitude of festivals, agricultural fairs, art walk, Canada Food Day, Fusion, Cornfest, Omjanon powwows, cultural celebrations, and so on. We have 3 performing arts centers in the county, and as I mentioned, a number of museums. The gallery serves a broad demographic and an expansive mandate that encompasses the local to the national, the historical to the contemporary, and includes every artistic medium, from paint and photography to video, installation, sound, and performance art. Offering a balance of in-house and touring exhibitions, the gallery remains relevant by presenting many different styles of art and experimenting with different forms of engagement and partnerships to both stimulate and entertain our audience. The emphasis of my presentation today will be on the 2 things that, for us, made our project possible and continues to ensure that the gallery is robust and sustainable as we move into the future. Those 2 things are the programming and keeping promises. I'm going to start our story with the Masterworks from the Beaver Brook Art Gallery exhibition that opened at the JNEG on October. JNEG is short for Judith and Norman Alix Art Gallery. On October 2nd, 2015, exactly 3 years after we opened the doors of our new gallery to the public. The reason I'm starting here is because this exhibition embodied one of the key elements as to why I believe our project was a success, and that is we delivered on the promises that were made during the campaign within our first 3 years of being open. The Masterworks exhibition was organized by the Beaver Brook Art Gallery in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and traveled to a select destinations across Canada and the United States. The JNEG was the only stop in central Canada, and until it went to the Audain Art Museum in Whistler, we were the only regional gallery in which it was mounted. The exhibition included 75 masterworks from the permanent collection of the Beaver Brook Art Gallery and was comprised of British paintings and drawings from the Georgian and modern periods, seminal American and Canadian works, and featured historical works of art by world-renowned artists including Gainsborough, Constable, Delacroix, Turner, Freud, and Dali, and by prominent historical Canadian artists such as Krieghoff, Morris, Harris, and Carr. These are works that had never ever been brought to the community before, and many members of our community would never have had an opportunity to see artwork of this caliber before. The original visitor goal of 10,000 people was considered by many to be ambitious for our community. But by the exhibition's close, we had 21,435 visitors come through the doors, representing a 214% increase of the goal. The exhibition's broad visitor geographic reach is noteworthy. We brought in visitors from the GTA and across various provinces, as well as from the US, but it is the social impact on the community that was dominant. Data shows that 65% of the exhibition attendees came from Lambton County, of which 50% of those were first-time visitors to the gallery. Even though we had been open and very active for 3 years, still 50% of the attendees to this exhibition had never been there before. The economic impact of Masterworks from the Beaver Brook Art Gallery exhibition generated between $740,000 and $1.6 million, depending on what methodology you choose to make that calculation. Locally bought services during the preparation and exhibition period totaled just under $300,000, impacting 85 local businesses and independent artists. It also presented us with numerous opportunities for building new community partnerships from, as you see here, barbershops to local breweries. Volunteers logged an impressive 2,400 hours in just the 4.5 months that this exhibition was open. And this does not take into account the full year's worth of planning, researching, and training that they participated in. Social media platforms experienced a high level of engagement, resulting in the gallery's Twitter and Facebook audiences growing by 25% and 35% respectively. Perhaps the most important decision that we made was keeping admission to the exhibition free. This was a promise we made during the capital campaign, that art should be accessible to all regardless of economic status. And that wouldn't change whether we were presenting local artists or exhibitions such as the Masterworks. Gallery staff continues to work hard to keep this promise. It is one that, and it was especially difficult for our decision makers to accept that an exhibition of this caliber did not have an admission fee attached to it. We were convinced that if we put a strong effort into marketing, developed a robust and relevant schedule of programs and partnerships, some of which would have a fee and some of which would be free, and had a clear and somewhat aggressive ask program at the door, we would raise more revenue than if we had an admission fee, and our attendance, including repeat visits, would not be hindered, but in fact enhanced. Visitors were able to make donations while booking their entry ticket online through the Masterworks microsite or in person, using one of the many donation boxes placed throughout the gallery. Over the 4.5 months of the exhibition, the gallery collected $60,000 in donations. Our target was $10,000. While these stats are for us impressive and very critical politically, optically, and financially, the sustained community value, the goodwill we fostered toward the gallery, is that we delivered on key promises made throughout the capital campaign. Some of those were that we would be able to bring in a major exhibition that we would not have been able to ever bring in had we not had a new gallery that was Category A designated. That our admission would be free, and that we would produce robust educational and community programming, that there'd be something for everyone, and that the gallery could contribute to a revitalization of the community. We would attract visitors that by extension would shift perceptions that outsiders have about our community, that it would generate a sense of community pride, which it did, and that there would be a contribution to spin-off economies. We kept the promises we made during the campaign. And that, I think, is one of the key things. Do not make promises that you aren't 100% positive that you can deliver on within a very defined and short period of time. For us, it was 3 years that we were able to tick off all the promises we made during the campaign. At the time we started selling the idea for our new Category A public gallery in Sarnia, which was around 2007, 2008, Canada was at the start of a major economic recession, one that hit Sarnia especially hard as many of the industries in the valley either reduced in size or packed up and left. Local businesses were going bankrupt, there was significant unemployment and hardship, and it's very difficult for a regional community to wrap their heads around the logic of investing millions in an art gallery when a growing number of people were losing their jobs, were struggling putting food on the table. And on top of that, selling the need for a Category A public art gallery with its increased construction and operating costs was even harder. So now I'd like to go back to 2007 when I arrived in Sarnia to work at Gallery Lambton, which is what it was, Judith and Norma, the Alix Art Gallery was when I first came, and kind of walk us through the journey to the Masterworks. When I came on, the gallery was at a crossroads. We were under growing pressure to prove to County Council that the gallery was relevant and vital to the community. This is images of the mall location where we were prior to the new build. It was widely recognized that their current location in the mall was problematic on a number of levels, but with attendance dropping, a disengaged public, and an alienated arts community, it was becoming increasingly difficult to justify its current level of funding and even its existence. I was told during my interview that I would have a window of about 3 years to prove that art and the art gallery was something the community wanted. If successful, the process of moving to a new purpose-built facility would be considered. If unsuccessful, the gallery would become essentially an archive with a small space to display the work that was in the collection. What was immediately apparent was that there were two very detrimental assumptions that were being made. The first was that the feeling was that the problem of our growing disengaged public and alienated local arts community would be fixed if we were out of the mall and had our own building. That the awful location and declining facility was why we were getting people in the door. The second assumption was that the local community and the capacity to engage with and understand contemporary art practices was limited and was very underestimated. We took the position that if we developed programming in a relevant and exciting way for our community, they would come, regardless of the space. Just want to give a little bit of an example of what I mean. I think most of us are familiar with the ROM exterior, which was their reconstruction, which started around 2003. There was an incredible emphasis on the facility, on the facade, This was during the time of the big super builds and, the outdoing of the design being one of the key things of the expansion project. However, it was done at the detriment of the programming. And within short order after it opened in 2010, the ROM hired a new CEO, and their mandate was to refocus the emphasis from the building and the site to the programming, to what was inside. This is the second key takeaway that I'd like to share, and I believe is key to the success of our project and our continued success. Don't be seduced by the build it and they will come trap. Focus and invest in community programming that is relevant to your community now and moving forward. And don't underestimate your community and their interest in art, whether they, We made the strategic decision to put a considerable amount of effort and resources into revitalizing the artistic programming and to have fun, while at the same time doing the feasibility studies and other background work necessary to move a capital project like this forward. And those efforts happened simultaneously. This turned out to be critical, as the stimulus funding, which was announced in 2009, we were eligible for, because the feasibility study and the strat plan had been completed. We were able to be shovel ready. But if we could not show the community support and that the engagement with the gallery and art was building, our own local county council would not have allowed us to go after the stimulus funding. The first thing we did was rework the artistic vision and to make it more accessible. While there are many critical points that have to be successfully realized in a project like this, I really want to emphasize that for us, an emphasis on programming and rebuilding our programming was key, because through this programming, a wide range of different activities, we started building relationship with community. Basically, when I arrived, there had been no contemporary art practices being presented in about 20 years. And by that, I mean video, performance, sound, anything technology or media-based. And it was pretty apparent that if we didn't bring the community into a relationship with these contemporary practices, which by this time, many of them were historic, we wouldn't stand a chance of meeting our institutional obligation of supporting artists and building a collection, or in addressing the needs of our current or future public. So a curatorial strategy was developed that would expose our public to what had been going on in the art world since the 60s in a respectful and accessible way. And breaking free of an old framework in terms of fixed hours and location, we set out to bring art to the community versus making the community come to art. This was very critical in the early days. We developed the Fast Forward project. This was a project designed to introduce video performance, installation, and sound art to the community. We believed that if we could engage and challenge the public on multiple levels and nudge them toward the contemporary, we could foster and expand their relationship to art. In this way, we would bring the diverging institutional and public views, ideas, and attitudes into momentary alignment. And the process of doing that would generate relevance and vitality. We didn't expect that there would be a watershed of alignment and engagement with art. We were looking for those moments of alignment. Throughout this time, while we were introducing contemporary art, we continued working with our collection and our historic collection. And we wanted to bring historical art into a dynamic relationship with contemporary voices. So we did not ignore the historical while we were doing this. Very quickly, within 2 years, our first Friday events were bringing in between 300 and 500 people every month within a 3-hour time period. and with some fluctuations, we continue to meet those targets. The attendees that came represented a broad demographic: young people, seniors, families, kids, homeless people, rich people, blue-collar workers, the gamut. These little ladies, I was walking out of the gallery behind them, and as they were leaving, they were sitting here watching Paul Couillard, a performance artist, stand motionless with a block of melting ice in his mouth for like 45 minutes. And one of them said, "What the heck was that?" And the other answered, "I don't know, but at least it was interesting." And for us, that was a moment of alignment. We can't underestimate our audience. These women sat there and watched Paul Couillard for over an hour, and it was wonderful. This little guy spent the entire night in the gallery. His parents actually asked if they could leave him there and come back and pick him up. This little kid had momentary alignment with the activities of the gallery. Each program in Fast Forward built an audience for contemporary and new media art practice, and clearly demonstrated capacity, if not a hunger, for challenging and complex artistic ideas within our community. Equally important, each program revealed a small but talented group of artists in our own community who were practicing video, performance, and sound, and had never even considered that what they were doing was art. Paying attention to and building community, in my view, pays off. When the decision about whether or not to move forward with the new gallery was to be made at County Council, there was record attendance, standing room only. Downtown businesses actually closed their door and set up carpools to get people to the council chambers and to attend. And there was a 2.5 hours spent where members of the community, all ages and economic backgrounds, spoke in support of the gallery. There were only 2 naysayers, and when it was time to vote on the project, only 1 council member voted against the new gallery. Within our first 3 years, by working with our public and meeting our public, by removing barriers to art, both physically and psychologically, and by focusing on artistic programming that was relevant and challenging to our community and presented in a way that was accessible, respectful, and fun, we were able to address the sometimes divergent public, these institutional and artistic interests around art. 3 years later, the new purpose-built gallery opened, and within our first 3-year cycle, we had delivered on all our promises that we made while achieving a balanced and dynamic program that continues to build and sustain our audience. What I haven't touched on here was the importance for our community to insist on having a Category A facility. This is what allowed us to keep some of our key promises and makes it possible to build a permanent collection. Like many smaller galleries, we have no real budget to acquire art, but because of the level of exhibition programming that a Category A gallery has allowed us to do, we have seen an increase in significant donations of art since the gallery opened. So just in summary, really quickly, some of the key learnings that I think I want to emphasize. Bring the community along with you on the journey. It will ensure that the community is engaged with and excited about art before you launch a campaign. And don't get sucked into the build it and they will come trap. And connected to that, don't overbuild your facility. Invest in a robust artistic program with exhibitions, community, and education. Don't underestimate your community. And I feel that integrating the location of the physical building is critical. And from my view, in a community like ours, integrating it into the community was key. We chose the adaptive reuse of a community historical building. That was right at the main intersection of downtown. We saved a historical facade, just the 2 sides of it. And even though it added considerably to the cost, it significantly increased and broadened our community support. And this is because an art gallery is more than just a vessel to display art. A gallery is a key contributor to the establishment of a community hub. I would say make the gallery easy to visit and remove as many barriers as possible. We did that by keeping the admission free. The location, people don't have to make a decision to drive out to the gallery. They can be walking downtown and pop in for 5 minutes. And keep the entrance welcoming and the facade welcoming. Don't make promises you can't keep within a relatively short period of time. And don't underestimate the value and importance of marketing. In addition to investing in programming, you need to invest in marketing. And get a project manager who understands both the construction world and the way they think, and the artistic world and the way we think. I would also say, if you're going for, regardless of whether you're going for Category A or not, I would work with the Canadian Conservation Institute from start to finish. We did that. And do whatever it takes to implement their suggestions. That's really the end of my presentation. I just have a few slides I'll scroll through really, really quickly in order to give you these are architectural pictures of the inside of the building. The front lobby, which changes, we continually paint and build walls, so it's never the same. Again, that's the lobby. You can see the full floor-to-ceiling windows, keeping it wide open to the public. We also saved the heritage stairs that were in the building. Again, added cost, but added endearment to the community. We have a conference room. This is the second floor as you come up the heritage stairs, the permanent collection gallery. You can see the entrance in here and the lecture space. That's the lecture space, which is totally smart and also can be used as a presentation space. The ramp up to the administration, that's the interior view of the ramp that joins the gallery to the administration. That's the exterior. Administration area. We have 3 storage, collection storage areas. This is the 2-dimensional storage and the art studio. We were able to get a research library, which was key. And our main gallery spaces are upstairs on the 3rd floor. There's 2 galleries up there. This is the main gallery space, the same space. You can see we construct walls. We don't have temporary walls. That's the same space. That's the same space. That's the smaller gallery on the 3rd floor. That's the same smaller gallery on the 3rd floor. So we put a lot of energy and emphasis in designing exhibitions as well, making the experience different every time for the public, which brings them back over and over. And the permanent collection gallery. And I think that's it. And I hope looks like I went over a little bit. I apologize.
No, that's great, Lisa. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. And I'm looking at the comment box and the chat box, and a lot of people are really thrilled about your project. A lot of congratulations. And Russell's going to share it with his board of directors all the way up in the Sioux. So thank you for sharing your project and your story with us. All fantastic stuff. And yes, we will be sharing slides at the end of the presentation and be sending them out tomorrow. So you can expect to see those as well, and please do share internally to help make your cases for your similar projects. We're going to switch gears now and move on to Monica Estevez, who's going to tell us about their recent build at Streetcar Crowsnest. Some background on Streetcar before we officially turn things over, Monica. Streetcar Crowsnest is the first permanent home for Crow's Theatre. Since 1983, Crow's has been a leading force in the Canadian theatre landscape, recognized for provocative and award-winning new theatre works that has toured nationally and internationally. In January 2017, following the completion of a $11.5 million capital campaign, Crow's opened the doors to Streetcar Crowsnest. As the first performing arts facility of its kind in Toronto's East End, home to over 1.3 million residents, the new facility offers a dynamic spectrum of affordable contemporary theater, all ages arts events, wide-ranging community programming, and partnerships. In the early days of the capital campaign and facility planning, a collaboration between Crow's Theatre and Streetcar Developments resulted in two catalyst contributions. Initially, a $1.5 million contribution through Section 37, followed by a generous and game-changing $1.25 million lead gift to the new facility. The new and beautiful Streetcar Crowsnest houses multiple venues for programming and events. And the Galoyan Theatre, please correct my pronunciation later if you do talk about it, the Scotiabank Community Studio for performances, rehearsals, and community activities, a stunning lobby bar, and its adjacent full-service restaurant, Gare de l'Est. So I'm going to switch now over to the presentation for you, Monica, but if you could just start introducing yourself.
You bet. Thanks, everyone. I also want to thank you, Alix, and ArtsBuild for a great forum for us to discuss and share our experiences. So in the presentation portion, folks, I am going to first walk through some of a bit more of the history behind Crows, particularly where we were at 8 years ago in 2010, and what the instigating circumstances there were that initiated our thinking about a facility and a change in the way that we operate. I'll walk through our phases of planning, kind of what we were key areas of focus in the 7 years from blue sky to reality to the completion of the facility, and those challenges and opportunities along the way. And then I'll show you some photos, similar to Lisa, of what the finished product looks like of the facility. What are some final numbers of our capital campaign and how we got there. How we're doing in operations now, and areas of focus in the coming years. Just waiting for the presentation.
Should be good to go.
No problem. We'll just hang tight. Thanks. Great. So do I have control here? Can I change move the slide? I can do that? Okay, great. Got it. Thank you. Okay, so some history and context very quickly. So as Alix mentioned, Crow's Theatre was founded in 1983, primarily over the course of its first 25 years of existence, focused on new play development, usually doing about 1 to 3 productions per year, a lot of mostly new Canadian work. And in the 90s, and particularly in the 2000s, touring nationally and internationally to some degree was also a primary activity for the organization. And obviously, in that time, Crows had never had its own space. So we were primarily, when we were doing productions in the city, in Toronto, we were renting or partnering at other venues across the city. So why change? Why did we want to stir the pot? What were the catalysts for change? So to step back, prior to 2010, Chris Abraham, our artistic director, took over as AD from the founding artistic director in 2007, so 11 years ago. He asked me to join him at the company in 2010, in summer 2010. We had actually known each other since theater school, all those a couple decades ago. And he brought me to the company because we wanted to do something big together. So I said yes, joined him at the company in the summer. And the first thing that we did in the summer of 2010 was embark on a strategic review of the company. It was fairly substantial, but it included a few key pieces. We reviewed and acknowledged the artistic strengths of the company, some of the challenges and threats to Crow's sustainability. Many of those were shared by other theater companies and other arts organizations in the city and across the country and probably the world. We also were looking at Crow's connection or lack of with a local audience base. And connected to that, we were looking at our local catchment area of Toronto's East End, as Alix mentioned, 1.3 million people east of the Don Valley Parkway, and a movie theater is about the extent of the cultural infrastructure at that time. And for both Chris and I, we were one of the other things that we had in common that we were both East Enders and glaringly aware of that lack of cultural infrastructure. I would also say in this review before moving forward that this strategic review didn't take us years to do. It didn't even take us months. We knew that we wanted to do something big and we needed to get cracking. Time was of the essence. So we acted quickly in this review. It took about a month with various stakeholders. And the outcome of that directly resulted in the 4 guiding principles that would end up functioning as a North Star for us during the business plan development, during the years of planning, design, community consultation, etc. So moving on to those. So our 4 guiding principles that came out of that first month at Crow's Theatre was that our plan, whatever our plan would be, we needed something that would enable us to nurture and further fortify the creative process at Crow's. We knew that we needed a plan that would enable Crow's to be financially viable and sustainable. We knew that and determined that whatever the plan was, it needed to enable audience growth, and not only audience growth, but a particular audience growth. We wanted an adventurous appetite in our audiences, particularly for new work. And we wanted a business model, a plan for the future that could fortify the roles of the arts in culturally underserved neighborhoods. And of course, specifically to us, we meant Toronto's East End. So just to dig in quickly on each of those, we'll go through fairly quickly. So in terms of the nurture and fortification of the creation process, I think just to note that in the 90s, particularly in the 2000s, Crow's was, as I mentioned, increasingly in demand on the touring network in Canada because the new work was solid. But increasingly, by the time Chris got there in 2007, the touring fees and the development contributions were declining, and we weren't seeing that as a viable path forward in the future. We also knew that if in the case that the big thing that we did together would be a facility of some kind, that we couldn't create a new facility and have that compromise our investment in new Canadian theater. In fact, the business model or facility plan, if it was that was the case, needed to increase those resources. And we also determined at that time, in terms of benchmarking potential plans, that ideally we wanted to be able to support 2 to 3 productions per year. In terms of financial viability, very quickly, I mean, I think that the bullets here, in terms of our review of what the current realities were, was that we any kind of plan for Crows in the future, and Crows at that time was relatively small, would require an increase to its annual operations, its revenues, and that given the current realities, well, everywhere, but we certainly felt it in Toronto, was we couldn't look at meaningful growth or count on any kind of meaningful increase to our government funding, to operating funding. We already were experiencing a very congested fundraising market, particularly in Toronto, and we're worried about looking at that avenue for a source of long-term sustainability. We were seeing and experiencing aging audiences at many of the venue theater companies across the country, and needed to address that. And of course, as discussed, the lack of cultural infrastructure outside of the downtown core of Toronto and the West End. So to the second bullet there, fairly quickly we started talking about social enterprise and what that meant, and exploring avenues that models that could potentially cover not all of our, we weren't being unrealistic, but not covering all of the revenues, but a meaningful part of the annual revenues, the diversification of our revenues, to cover the overhead of a facility, if in fact we ended up going towards a facility. With enabling audience growth, again, changing the conditions, a 21st century theater going experience. Much of this language about a 21st century theater experience, Alix mentioned that we have a restaurant on site, that we have a really cool bar. This early work about audiences helped us and really informed the design of the facility, and the purchase of additional square feet in order to have a restaurant. But I'm getting ahead of myself. And last but not least, we wanted to be in the East End. And in order to deliver in this principle, we would need to have the conditions to support and expand the mandate in order to be relative to a community. Just a little interesting factoid about our local catchment area. Crow's local catchment area, which is kind of, if you're familiar with Toronto, is Leslieville, Riverdale, Danforth, and the Beach. Has the highest percentage of households with children under the age of 6 in all of Toronto. So a lot of young families. So when we were, noting there in the third bullet about and their families, we knew that in order to do this, we needed a facility and a business plan that could support programming for young audiences. So it's so easy to do crow puns. We do it all the time at our organization, as the crow flies. So when I started in the summer of 2010, so it was about 6.5 years from our first initial review and when we opened the facility. So I just wanted to walk you through our process with this little chart. So each of the planning lines had its own structured phases that were very complicated in our plans, like the capital campaign, facility design, and construction. But what I've tried to do in this chart is to summarize the primary activities that were happening each year. And I'll take you through that in a moment. I would also add, it's important that concurrently to this, we also were focusing every year on increasing the organizational capacity of the organization, so that when we arrived to 2017, we would be able to actually run the facility. So quickly, starting on the left there with 2010, it's a half year. We started working in the summer. The primary area of focus was research. And one of the key areas in there was focused on, after the review that we had in creation of the guiding principles, was looking at social enterprises and researching existing models that might either be viable for us or inspire our thinking. That included travel to the US, where they historically have had less government funding. So we spent a bit of time in the fall and winter of 2010 in the US, particularly in New York. And it was during that fall winter research trips and work that we selected the business model. We had three that we kind of did quick feasibility studies on, and identified our lead horse, and then continued to dig into it a little bit deeper, and that took us into the continued planning in 2011. So once we identified our lead horse, or what seemed to be have the most potential for us, we embarked on business plan development. So we completed and developed our business plan internally. We did that on our own, and we internally conducted an initial feasibility assessment, and then hired a third-party consultant to test our feasibility and kind of do a feasibility test. We also conducted capital campaign roundtables with philanthropists and corporations in the city, testing our business model, presenting it to them to get a sense of whether they found it interesting, and whether they thought we had any chance of raising multiple millions of dollars in the private sector. At this time, notably in 2011, in the summer of 2011, one of the people that we had reached out to was our local city councillor, Paula Fletcher, just to give her a heads up that we had our eyes on potentially building a performing arts facility in her ward. And quite serendipitously, it was Paula that suggested that we sit down with Les Mallins, who's the president of Streetcar Developments, which is a mid-sized condo developer in Toronto. They have a few West End properties, but primarily in Toronto's East End, which is kind of a very unique thing about Streetcar Developments. So that summer, we met with Streetcar, and I can speak more to it about it later on. But I would say, and we kind of looking at this 7 years, 8 years, looks like a long time, but candidly, we were not ready for that meeting with the developer. We had this opportunity with a condo that they were building in Leslieville, that they were, 2 years away from breaking ground. We had to make a decision very quickly about whether we could catch up, whether we could accelerate our plans, or what our preliminary plans were at that time, in order to take advantage of this opportunity. And obviously, we decided to do so. In 2012, was very much focused on working with Streetcar and with the city. Alix mentioned the Section 37. For those of you who may not be familiar with Section 37, it's essentially in the Planning Act for Toronto. In brief, developers are able to access additional density or height. In exchange for that, they make contributions for community benefit. And sometimes that community benefit is a cash contribution to parks or street benches or a charity, or sometimes it's land, or something similar to what we've done. So in our case, we knew that the Section 37 with this facility wasn't going to be enough. The square footage that was gifted to us through the Section 30, then the developer in the city was, I think 5,000 square feet, which was nowhere near what we needed to build a mid-sized performing arts facility, but it was a really good head start. And much of 2012 was focused on getting that nailed down, which we did by October 2012. It was approved unanimously at City Council, which my understanding from the city was that was very, very fast. And I credit that to the work of our stakeholders and the city councillor and supporters of and one preliminary phase of community consultation that enabled, I think, enabled us to make a really strong case for support in the city. At that time, once we had that on hand, we knew that we had kind of essentially committed ourselves. It wasn't an if about having a facility, it was a when. And we began a very quick 4-month quiet phase of a capital campaign where we focused on securing a few substantial six-figure donations from philanthropists in the city, which we did. Early in 2013, we publicly announced the facility, again much earlier than the industry standard is. Usually you from what I understand, you want to secure 40% or so of your fundraising before announcing to the public. Because of the Section 37 approval, it was going to be announced, it was going to be broadly known, so we needed to get ahead of it. And again, further commit ourselves to actually having this project realized. In 2013, I'm just singing up, crow's puns are great. In 2013, then we had to race. We were, getting architects in place, completing the phase 1 of design. We had to secure key contracts, architects, construction managers. We needed to get a costing on the facility, which meant that first we needed to actually complete the first phase of design. And we needed to really put our heads down with public sector fundraising, which we did. And then to kind of blow through the next pieces, it's probably self-explanatory. We spent a lot of 2014 and 15 focusing on the capital campaign. We had a lot of money to raise. And we'll get into a little bit later on. I have a little bit of diagram of where those funds came from. And trying to catch up with the condo, which actually in late 2015, the construction of the actual condo was completed. The lower base of it was completed to our specification. And that's it, I guess. 2016 was construction, and a very, very busy year. We opened in mid-January 2017. The doors to our lobby were installed the same day that we had our first public performance, so we squeezed through. But we did it in about 6.5 years, which is felt like a really long time, but I think, candidly, looking backwards, that we kept at a good clip. So just to take a moment, I know time is getting, I'm going to blow through this fairly quickly, but lemons to lemonades, transforming our challenges to opportunities. We were not an organization in 2010 that would have been identified at being able to accomplish this. In 2010, we had 2.5 full-time employees, which meant myself, Chris, the artistic director, and an intern. And the office was in Chris's basement. We knew that we needed to keep up programming at the existing level while undertaking everything. And at that time in 2010, a relatively low fundraising threshold each year, about just under 200,000 back in 2010. We did have a lot of opportunities, though, which we identified, which really put a lot of wind in our sails. We were both committed to each other, to seeing this through. We had an evolving and growing board of directors who evolved with us. Each year, the fundraising minimum for board members increased, and board members were very committed to the organization. And when they were unable to grow with Crows as our fundraising threshold grew, we had a lot of board members continue to support but step off the board when we needed more heavy hitters on the board. We had 4 really great hooks in our case for support. The business model, which I can get to later, being the first theater of its kind east of the DVP, the mandate, the quality of the work, and Chris's reputation as well. And I think really importantly, in terms of our success, that because we were a small team, it was a challenge, but it was also an opportunity. We were quick, we were agile, we weren't a big ship trying to move. We could be really quick and agile. We could really reinvent Crows. Its mandate, its purpose, which again could be a challenge, but we saw it as an opportunity. And in that first couple years, the work that we did in the first first year and a half of roundtables, etc., enabled us to get several key major supporters early on in the process, and they were absolutely instrumental to the success of the capital campaign. So our venue, and we did it on time and on budget, which we're of course very proud of. So Crow's Theatre, Streetcar Crowsnest is our venue. Streetcar Developments was a naming sponsor, so hence the Streetcar Crowsnest for the name of the facility. So inside the main theatre is a 200-seat multi-configurational theatre called the Galoin Theatre. You can see there at the bottom an empty space. I'll show you photos of it in a moment of it in theatre mode. Just to touch on our business model for a moment. We have a theatre season and an event season. So from early October to mid-April each year, for roughly 26 weeks of the year, we are primarily a theater venue. Theater, music, opera, etc., in both spaces. In our event season, from mid-April to the beginning of October, we are primarily, but not exclusively, a social and corporate and wedding event venue. So the flexibility of the space was paramount in the design. And you can see at the bottom there that doesn't have all the tables, and when it looks really beautiful for weddings, of which we've had a number of weddings already in the first year and are hitting those revenue targets. But just to get a sense of the bare room. We've for theater, just some photos of some of the shows that we had in the space in 2017. Up at the top there, that's a photo of A&R Angels, which was written by Kevin Drew, who was the co-founder of Broken Social Scene, which is a really successful show we had last November. The Scotiabank Community Studio is a 90-seat studio. There it is, again, in its empty form at the bottom. Running theme, flexibility, multi-configurational, works well for performances, cabarets, but also for events and meetings and workshops. We had a number of really great shows there in 2017. Anecdotally, early on in our planning, we were thinking that the studio would be more of a rehearsal space. As our thinking evolved and as the demand grew, we realized that we needed to make some adjustments in the phases of facility design to really enable it to be a performance space, because it just seemed to be so in demand from our own artists and from smaller theater companies who were eager to work with us in our first years and wanted to get in there in the studio in a space that was in that kind of 90-seat capacity. My favorite place, the bar, the lobby bar, is beautiful. We early on, hang on, just going to my notes. We knew it was important on multiple fronts because of our two business lines that the lobby was really attractive. For that adventurous audience, we wanted a space that was really cool and hip. For our social and corporate events, we wanted a space that photographed really well and could sell itself in some ways. Up at the top there, at the top and on the left of the bottom photo, you'll see an art installation that is really beautiful, particularly on from exterior, looking at it from the outside. Some more photos of our lobby bar. Directly adjacent to the lobby, you can walk right from the lobby into the restaurant. We lease it out to an operator, and the restaurant is Gare de l'Est. It's a French brasserie that opened last May. It's a 60-seat restaurant, I think maybe 65. The operators had 3 existing restaurants in the Leslieville area, so they completely understood and were committed to the neighborhood. They knew what they were doing, and they're doing really, really well. They're jam-packed from 5:30 to 8 o'clock. It's very difficult to get a seat. Just to quickly give you some numbers on our capital campaign. So I think you'll have access, I believe, to this PowerPoint afterwards, and you can read some of the copy here. But in brief, 29% of the capital campaign revenues came from the public sector, a combination of the Canadian Heritage Cultural Spaces program primarily, the City of Toronto Section 37, which I've referred to, and Ontario Trillium Foundation. And then the balance of the capital campaign came from the private sector. Private sector individuals and private sector corporately, cumulatively contributing 71% of the fundraising of the funds for the capital campaign, and pretty much an even split between individuals and corporate. Just quickly to ArtsBuild, talking about builds. Our team, small and agile, nevertheless, we had one individual from our board of directors who had construction experience, who was our board build committee of one person. So we didn't have to manage a big, complicated committee. I had one person that I dealt with on the board with all things construction. Our architect, DTH, Joe Lobko, was our principal architect. Below the architects were the engineers, structural, mechanical, electrical, etc. Early on in the process, we selected our construction management team, Brown Daniels and Associates, who were fantastic. And obviously they contracted out to all of the sub-trades. We engaged specialty consultants, theatrical consultants, fire plan, AV, and all FF&E. In terms of project management, just to note about learnings. Initially, we didn't think that we needed a project manager. It was about 6 months prior to beginning construction, I think maybe submitting our permits or construction permits, that we realized that we needed this type of support. I, in particular, needed it. So at the time, we had to rustle up additional funds in order to pay for it. What we came up with was enough to keep a part-time project manager on the project, kind of part-time, about 1.5 days per week over an 18-month period. If I could go back in time, I would have contracted a production manager full-time and had that production manager start it's a project management team, BMX. I think they've been acquired by a larger company at this point, but Peter Manna was our guy, and he's amazing. I would have brought them on earlier. I think there were issues that came up in construction that were costly, that could have been avoided if we had a PM in place a bit earlier. If there's time for questions, I can get over to that. So lastly, very quickly, how are we doing benchmarking against our guiding principles? We've had a huge increase to the amount of shows and programming that we're doing, way more than we initially anticipated, and increased our annual budget significantly. We've really quadrupled our annual investment in play development, which is we're really pleased that we're able to do. In terms of the business model, it's working really well. It's we didn't expect to get out of the gates. Our plan is a growth plan, a 4-year plan, but we've hitting our year 1 targets. Audience growth, so important, and that audience, we were just thrilled with the attendance in the first year in 2017, with almost all of the shows really surpassing their box office targets, which is so encouraging. I would agree with Lisa's caution in her presentation about the build it and they will come attitude. We didn't have that attitude, and I think that's what enabled us to have strong audience attendance in the first year. I think inevitably having bricks and mortar helped. People drive by and walk by and wonder what's going on in there. But I really believe that the lion's share of our audience growth came from the multiple stages of community consultation that we did in the previous years. An incredible amount of outreach to our maximum bandwidth, and a really aggressive marketing campaign in the year prior to opening. And lastly, connected to that, we did a study last year, kind of the first 6 months of operations, postal code survey study, that depending on the production, but most productions fell in about 40% of our audience came from our local catchment area. And, by Toronto terms, like local is really small. It's our ward. So that surprised us. That really surpassed our expectations. So we're really pleased about that. And you can look at that list later because we're running back on time. But these are just a list of some of the things that we did in 2017 and some of the recognition that we received by the press in the new year. And that's it from me. You'll get this slide and my contact information is there. If you have any questions after this, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much, Monica. A tall order to summarize your entire capital project and the journey in just 25 minutes. So, I appreciate everything that you've shared with us today, and I'm sure our participants have. There's lots of great feedback in the chat box. So we have gone over, everyone, but that I think well worth it because there was some great information shared from both Lisa and Monica for our arts organizations. What I would like to do is invite anybody who has a question to chat it or type it in the chat box. I do have a couple, and I think they're addressed to you, Monica. The first one is I've got Demetra saying, might it be possible to get the wedding fee schedule for your venue?
Most of the information is available on our website. If you go to crowstheater.com, we have a whole section right up at the top there. We have a whole section on weddings, and that information is available there.
We can totally share that link in the follow-up email we share with participants, so we can throw that in there for sure. Alethea, who is, I'm assuming from Sudbury based off of Demetra and Alethea talking about Plastas Arts, when the Galoin Theatre is in theater mode, what is the seating?
It's raked. We have Canadell seating system, so it's completely multi-configurational. We've rarely, in the 23 shows that we've had since in the last 15 months, most of those in the Galoin, we haven't had many duplications of the seating configuration, but generally it's about 200 seats, theater in the round, proscenium, landscape, thrust. It's very multi-configurational.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any? Oh, Yolanda is typing, and there's a couple more coming in, so I'll just wait for those to come in. There are thank yous, which are always appreciated. Anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask either Lisa or Monica while we have them here? Feel free to type in the chat box, and I will read it out for the group. All right, it looks like no more questions at this time. I will share the contact information here we are, more information. One more question from Yolanda, yes. Where and how do you store the seating, and how many hours and hands does it take to reconfigure?
Great question. We store most of the seating on site, and it's a game of Tetris, because if I could go back in time and purchase more real estate, more land in order to have more storage space, I would do that. I think everybody experiences that there's not enough storage. But in the summer months, in our event season from April to beginning of October, we actually store the seating offsite, the seating offsite, just to free up space. And the time that it takes to reconfigure really depends on what's the state A to B. If you're going from proscenium or in the round, they take a bit more time, but I would say roughly 4 to 8 hours. I know there's a big difference there, but the configuration makes a big difference.
Great, thanks, Monica and Yolanda. So what I'm going to do is wrap things up for now. Thank you both to Lisa Daniels and Monica Estevez for sharing with us more information and more details about your capital projects, both very different projects, but both very valuable for us to learn from. Again, as we've mentioned, these slides will be provided to all participants, as well as a link to the recording. We will provide a link to any resources as well that were brought up here today. And I would also like to invite you to complete a survey that we send out at the end of every Learning Series webinar we present at ArtsBuild Ontario, so that'll be coming your way tomorrow morning. And lastly, I'd just like to thank our funders for supporting the Learning Series, the Department of Canadian Heritage, the Ontario Trillium Foundation, and the Ontario Arts Council for their support. And thank you to all of you for joining us this afternoon. If you'd like to learn more about the Learning Series, feel free to visit our website at artsbuildontario.ca. Thank you, and have a great rest of your afternoon.